At exactly 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in Pacific Palisades, California, David Morrison's doorbell rang. He expected a package delivery. Instead, he found himself staring into his own green eyes, reflected back from the face of a 6-year-old boy clutching the hand of a nervous woman he hadn't seen in 7 years. The woman spoke 4 words that would either destroy his $80 million empire and 12-year marriage, or save both in ways he never imagined possible. "This is your son." In the next 59 minutes, you'll witness how one moment of truth shattered 3 lives completely, then rebuilt them into something stronger than any of them thought possible. You'll discover why Elena Martinez waited 7 years to knock on that door, what drove a successful architect to make the most shocking decision of her marriage, and how a child's innocent drawing would heal wounds that seemed impossible to mend. This is the true story of David Morrison, Sarah Morrison, Elena Martinez, and 6-year-old Miguel, 4 people whose lives collided in the most unexpected way, teaching all of us that sometimes our greatest fears carry our most precious gifts. Before we start this incredible story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. David Morrison built his fortune from nothing. At 38, he controlled Cloud Sync Solutions, a data management company that grew from his garage startup to an $80 million enterprise in just 12 years. His success story read like a Silicon Valley fairy tale, the kind of American dream that business magazines loved to feature on their covers. His Pacific Palisades mansion sat on 2 acres of manicured grounds, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering sweeping views of the Pacific Ocean. The house itself told the story of careful success, modern architecture balanced with warm family touches, expensive art mixed with children's drawings taped to the refrigerator. Sarah Morrison, David's wife of 12 years, had built her own impressive career as an architect. Her firm specialized in sustainable luxury homes, and her work had been featured in Architectural Digest 3 times. At 36, she possessed the kind of quiet confidence that came from professional achievement and financial security. Their twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, were 10 years old, bright, curious children who attended the exclusive Crossroads School in Santa Monica. Every morning, they ate breakfast at the Granite Kitchen Island while Sarah packed their organic lunches and David reviewed emails on his phone. From the outside, the Morrisons represented everything money could buy: success, stability, and the kind of family harmony that made neighbors envious. But perfection, as David would soon discover, is often the most fragile illusion of all. The trouble had been building slowly, almost imperceptibly, like water seeping through marble. Sarah and David's conversations had gradually shifted from sharing dreams to coordinating schedules. Intimacy had been replaced by efficiency. Romance had given way to responsibility. Sarah found herself working later each evening, partially to avoid the empty feeling that settled over their house when David traveled, which happened 3 weeks out of every month. When he was home, he remained tethered to his phone, managing crises and opportunities across different time zones. "When did we stop being partners and become roommates?" Sarah had asked him 6 months earlier, during one of their increasingly rare conversations about anything deeper than logistics. David had looked up from his laptop, genuinely surprised by the question. "We're building something together, Sarah. This is temporary. Once the company goes public." "You said that 2 years ago," she had replied quietly. That conversation ended like most of their attempts at connection, with David promising to do better and Sarah retreating into her own work, both of them avoiding the growing distance between them. The twins sensed the tension, though neither parent realized how much their daughters absorbed. Emma had started having nightmares about her parents disappearing. Sophie had begun clinging to Sarah every morning before school, as if afraid her mother might not be there when she returned. What neither David nor Sarah understood was that their marriage had become a house of cards, beautiful and impressive from the outside, but requiring only the slightest breeze to collapse entirely. That breeze was about to arrive in the form of Elena Martinez and her son. Tuesday, October 15th, started differently. For once, David had decided to work from his home office instead of driving to the corporate headquarters in Century City. Sarah was preparing breakfast, something that had become rare enough to feel special. The twins were getting ready for school, their laughter echoing through the house as they debated whether Sophie's science project about volcanoes would actually erupt. David sat at the kitchen island, laptop open, but for the first time in months, he wasn't entirely focused on work. He watched Sarah move around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, noticed how the morning light caught the auburn highlights in her hair that he'd somehow stopped seeing. "Maybe we could have dinner tonight," he said, surprising himself with the suggestion. "Just us. I could make reservations somewhere." Sarah paused, a slight smile crossing her face. "That would be nice." Emma looked up from her cereal. "Are you and Mommy going on a date?" "Maybe we are," David replied, reaching over to ruffle his daughter's hair. For a moment, the Morrison family felt like a family again. The weight of unspoken resentment seemed to lift slightly, replaced by the possibility that they might find their way back to each other. The doorbell rang at exactly 8:47 a.m. David glanced at his phone. No deliveries were scheduled. No appointments were planned. "I'll get it," he said, closing his laptop. As he walked toward the front door, he had no idea that his hand was reaching for the handle that would open onto the most important moment of his life. David opened the heavy oak door expecting to see a delivery driver or perhaps a lost tourist asking for directions. Instead, he found himself looking at Elena Martinez for the first time in 7 years. She stood on his doorstep wearing a simple blue dress and tennis shoes, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped the fingers of a small boy who was partially hidden behind her legs. Elena looked exactly as David remembered, except for the lines around her eyes, lines that spoke of years of worry and responsibility. Her face held the same gentle beauty that had caught his attention in Mexico City, but now it carried something heavier, the weight of a secret she could no longer bear alone. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry to come to your home like this." David's mind raced, trying to process what he was seeing. Elena Martinez. Here. At his house. After 7 years of complete silence. "Elena," he managed to say, his voice catching slightly. "What are you? How did you?" "I need to talk to you," she said, then gently urged the boy forward. "We need to talk to you." The child stepped out from behind Elena's legs, and David's world stopped. The boy was small for his age, maybe 6 years old, with Elena's olive skin and dark hair. But his eyes were unmistakably David's own shade of green. The same unusual color that David had inherited from his Irish grandmother. The same eyes that looked back at him from mirrors and family photographs. More than that, the child's facial structure was eerily familiar. The stubborn set of his jaw. The way his eyebrows drew together when he was thinking. The slight dimple in his chin. It was like looking at himself as a child. "This is Miguel," Elena said, her voice stronger now. "He's 6 years old." David's mathematical mind automatically calculated backward. 6 years old. Conceived 7 years ago. Mexico City. The business expansion trip. The worst period of his marriage. "What are you saying, Elena?" David asked, though part of him already knew. Elena looked directly into his eyes, summoning courage she'd been gathering for months. "I'm saying this is your son, David. Miguel is your son." Behind David, footsteps approached. Sarah appeared in the doorway, still holding the dish towel she'd been using to dry her hands. Her eyes took in the scene, her husband's pale face, the woman she'd never seen before, and the child who bore an undeniable resemblance to the man she'd married. "David." Sarah's voice was carefully controlled. "Who is this?" David turned toward his wife, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "How do you explain something you don't fully understand yourself? How do you introduce your wife to a woman from your past and the child she claims is your son?" "My name is Elena Martinez," Elena said, addressing Sarah directly. "I met your husband 7 years ago in Mexico City, during his business trip there." Sarah's grip tightened on the dish towel. She remembered that trip. David had been gone for 10 days, longer than originally planned. She had been recovering from a miscarriage, their third pregnancy loss in 2 years, and David had seemed distant, overwhelmed by her grief and his own sense of helplessness. "I see," Sarah said, though clearly she didn't see at all. Miguel, sensing the tension among the adults, pressed closer to his mother. He whispered something in Spanish, and Elena knelt down to his level. "It's okay, Mijo," she said softly. "These are good people." David watched this interaction, struck by Elena's gentle manner with the boy. The way she smoothed his hair. The protective way she positioned herself between Miguel and the strange situation. "Why now?" David asked. "Elena, why are you here now?" Elena stood up, taking Miguel's hand again. When she looked at David, her eyes were filled with tears she was fighting not to shed. "Because Miguel is sick," she said simply. "And I've run out of options." Elena's explanation came in halting sentences, interrupted by her need to maintain composure in front of her son. "He has a heart condition," she said. "A hole in his heart that's getting worse. The doctors say he needs surgery soon, or—" She couldn't finish the sentence in front of Miguel. "The surgery costs $150,000. My insurance will cover some of it, but not enough. My family has helped as much as they can, but we're not wealthy people." David processed this information, his mind reeling. A sick child. His child. A child he never knew existed. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he asked. "Elena, if you knew he was mine, why didn't you contact me years ago?" Elena's chin lifted slightly, and David recognized the proud expression he remembered from Mexico City. "Because I didn't want your money then, and I don't want it now," she said. "I wanted to raise him myself. I wanted him to have a mother who could provide for him through her own work, her own strength." "Then why are you here?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp with a mixture of confusion and growing anger. Elena looked at Sarah, then back at David. "Because last month, Miguel asked me why he doesn't have a father like the other children at school. He's 6 years old, and he's starting to understand that something is missing from his life." She paused, gathering her courage. "And because 3 weeks ago, the doctors told me that without the surgery, I might lose him before his 7th birthday." The weight of Elena's words settled over the doorstep like a heavy blanket. David felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Sarah clutched the doorframe, her knuckles white with tension. Miguel, oblivious to the full gravity of the adult conversation, looked up at David with curious green eyes. David's own eyes looking back at him from a face that was undeniably part of his genetic legacy. In that moment, David Morrison realized that his carefully constructed life was about to change forever. Sarah Morrison prided herself on her composure. 12 years of marriage to a high-powered entrepreneur had taught her to handle unexpected challenges with grace. She had navigated business crises, family emergencies, and social situations that would have rattled most people. But standing in her own doorway, looking at what appeared to be her husband's child, Sarah felt her carefully maintained control beginning to crack. "I need a moment," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "David, can I speak with you privately?" Elena understood immediately. "Miguel and I will wait in the car," she said, already turning away. "No," Sarah said, stopping her. "Come inside. Both of you. We need to handle this properly." The group moved into the Morrisons' living room, a space designed for entertaining guests, with its cream-colored sofas and carefully arranged art. Miguel's eyes widened as he took in the size of the room, the height of the ceilings, the view of the ocean through the massive windows. Elena sat on the edge of one sofa, keeping Miguel close to her side. David remained standing, running his hands through his hair in a gesture Sarah recognized as his response to extreme stress. Sarah excused herself to check on the twins, who were finishing breakfast in the kitchen. She found them exactly as she'd left them, Emma reviewing her spelling words, Sophie adding extra syrup to her pancakes. "Mom, who was at the door?" Emma asked. "Just some people Daddy needs to talk to for work," Sarah replied, her voice amazingly steady. "Finish up, girls. We don't want to be late for school." After dropping the twins at school, a 20-minute drive that gave Sarah time to think, she returned home to find David, Elena, and Miguel still in the living room. The adults were talking quietly while Miguel colored in a coloring book that Elena had pulled from her purse. "We need to talk," Sarah said to David as soon as she walked back into the room. They moved to David's home office, leaving Elena and Miguel in the living room. As soon as the door closed, Sarah's composure finally cracked. "During my miscarriage recovery," she said, her voice rising, "you were with another woman while I was losing our baby?" "Sarah, it wasn't like that," David began, but she cut him off. "What was it like, then? Explain to me what it was like." David sank into his desk chair, his head in his hands. "I don't know how to explain it. I was falling apart, Sarah. You were so sad, so unreachable. I felt like I was failing you, failing us. I couldn't help you, couldn't fix what was wrong. So you decided to find comfort with someone else? I didn't plan it. I didn't go to Mexico looking for anything like that. It just happened." Sarah laughed bitterly. "It just happened. And then what? You just forgot about it. You came home and pretended everything was normal. I came home and tried to be a better husband. You remember, after that trip, things got better between us for a while." Sarah did remember. David had returned from Mexico City different somehow, more attentive, more present. She had attributed it to the success of his business expansion, never imagining the real reason for his renewed focus on their marriage. "Did you love her?" Sarah asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. David was quiet for a long moment. "I cared about her. She was kind to me when I felt like I was drowning. But no, Sarah. I loved you. I came home to you. And now she's here with your son. We don't know for certain that he's mine." Sarah stared at her husband. "David, that child looks exactly like you. Anyone with eyes can see it." Through the office door, they could hear Elena's voice speaking softly to Miguel in Spanish, and the boy's occasional responses. The sound of another woman caring for David's child in Sarah's own living room felt surreal. When David and Sarah returned to the living room, they found Miguel asleep on the sofa, his head in Elena's lap. She was stroking his hair with a tenderness that spoke of years of devoted motherhood. "He gets tired easily now," Elena explained quietly. "The heart condition makes everything harder for him." Sarah sat down across from Elena, studying her carefully. She had expected to hate this woman, but what she saw was someone who was clearly struggling, clearly devoted to her child, and clearly terrified. "Tell me about that time in Mexico City," Sarah said. "I need to understand what happened." Elena glanced at David, who nodded reluctantly. "I was working at the Hotel Presidente in Mexico City," Elena began. "I was the concierge manager. It was a good job. I had worked there for 3 years, and I was proud of what I had accomplished." She paused, looking down at Miguel's sleeping face. "Your husband was staying at the hotel for his business meetings. He seemed sad, lonely. He would sit in the lobby bar late at night, just staring at his phone or his laptop, but not really working." Sarah felt a stab of recognition. She remembered those phone calls from Mexico City, David's voice sounding distant and hollow. "I would bring him coffee sometimes, or help him with directions to meetings. We started talking. He told me about his wife who was recovering from losing a baby. He told me how helpless he felt, how he didn't know how to comfort her." Elena's voice grew softer. "I had lost a baby too, 2 years before. A miscarriage at 5 months. I understood his pain, and his confusion about how to help someone he loved who was grieving." Sarah felt tears starting in her eyes, but she forced them back. "One night, he was particularly upset. He had called you, and the conversation hadn't gone well. He was crying in the lobby bar at midnight. I sat with him. We talked about loss, about marriage, about feeling helpless when someone you love is suffering." Elena looked directly at Sarah. "I want you to know that he talked about you constantly. How much he loved you. How much he blamed himself for not being able to take away your pain. How afraid he was that you would never recover from losing the baby. But you slept with him, Sarah said bluntly. Elena's cheeks flushed, but she maintained eye contact. Yes. One night. We were both broken people who found comfort in each other for a few hours. It wasn't about love or romance. It was about two people who understood each other's pain. David sat in silence, remembering that night. The vulnerability. The temporary escape from the overwhelming sense of failure that had been consuming him. When I realized I was pregnant, Elena continued, I was engaged to someone else. A man I had been dating for 2 years. When I told him about the baby, he assumed it was his. But when Miguel was born... She gestured toward the sleeping boy. It was obvious he wasn't Roberto's child. Roberto left. His family accused me of cheating, which I suppose was true, though not in the way they meant. Why didn't you contact David then? Sarah asked. Elena's expression grew proud again. Because I had made a choice to comfort a married man whose wife was grieving. I wasn't going to compound that mistake by disrupting his family. I decided to raise Miguel alone, with dignity. But you're here now. Elena's composure finally broke slightly. Because Miguel is dying, she whispered. And because he asked me why he doesn't have a daddy. And because I realized that my pride might cost my son his life. The room fell silent except for Miguel's soft breathing and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore outside. Sarah Morrison sat staring at this woman who had been intimate with her husband, who was raising her husband's child, who had kept silent for 6 years out of what appeared to be genuine respect for their marriage. And Sarah realized she had no idea what to do next. After Elena and Miguel left, Elena insisting they couldn't stay longer and impose on the family's kindness, Sarah announced she was taking the twins to her sister's house for a few days. I need time to think, she said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. I need to figure out what this means for our family. David found himself alone in the house for the first time in years. The silence felt oppressive. Every room held memories of the life he thought he'd built, the family he thought he knew. He sat in his office, staring at Elena's contact information written on a piece of paper. She had given him her phone number and address, a modest apartment in East Los Angeles, over an hour's drive from Pacific Palisades. The distance between their worlds felt both immense and meaningless. Money, success, social status, none of it mattered when faced with the reality of a sick child who might be his son. David's mind kept returning to Mexico City, to those 10 days that now felt like they had happened to someone else. He remembered his state of mind, the overwhelming sense of failure as a husband, the helplessness as he watched Sarah retreat into grief he couldn't reach. Elena had been like a lifeline during that time. Not romantically, not initially. Simply as another human being who understood loss and didn't expect him to have answers he didn't possess. Their night together had been born of mutual loneliness and shared pain. It wasn't an excuse, but it was the truth. Now, 7 years later, that night had produced a child who was fighting for his life. Sarah's sister, Michelle, lived in a craftsman-style house in Manhattan Beach. Her home was smaller than the Morrison mansion, but it radiated the warmth that Sarah's house had somehow lost over the years. Michelle had always been Sarah's confidant, the person she turned to when life became too complicated to navigate alone. 2 years younger than Sarah, Michelle had chosen a different path: marriage to a high school teacher, 3 children, and a life built around family rather than career achievement. Tell me everything, Michelle said after the twins were settled in the guest room with movies and snacks. Sarah recounted the morning's events, watching her sister's expressions change from shock to sympathy to confusion. So this woman shows up with David's son, needs money for surgery, and you're angry about an affair that happened 7 years ago during the worst period of your marriage? Michelle summarized. That's a very simplified way to put it, Sarah replied. But is it wrong? Sarah considered the question. I don't know how to feel about any of this, Michelle. There's a child who might die. There's a woman who seems genuinely decent, but slept with my husband. There's David, who betrayed me but apparently talked about me constantly while he was doing it. Michelle poured them both wine, even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. "What does your gut tell you?" she asked. "My gut tells me that this Elena woman isn't the villain in this story. My gut tells me that little boy looks exactly like David did at that age. My gut tells me that David is genuinely shocked and confused, not guilty and defensive. And my gut tells me that our marriage was already in trouble, and this might either destroy it completely or force us to deal with problems we've been avoiding for years." Sarah took a sip of wine, staring out Michelle's kitchen window at the ordinary suburban street beyond. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Seeing that woman today, hearing her story about David being sad and lonely in Mexico City, I realized I had no idea how much our miscarriages were affecting him. I was so consumed by my own grief that I never really considered his." Michelle reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand. "That doesn't excuse the affair. No, it doesn't. But it explains it in a way that feels human. Flawed and wrong, but human." Later that evening, as Sarah was tucking Emma and Sophie into Michelle's guest room beds, Emma asked the question Sarah had been dreading. "Mom, why are we staying at Aunt Michelle's? Are you and Daddy fighting?" Sarah sat on the edge of Emma's bed, choosing her words carefully. "Daddy and I have some grown-up things we need to talk about," she said. "Sometimes parents need space to think about important decisions." "What kind of decisions?" Sophie asked from the other bed. Sarah hesitated. "How do you explain to 10-year-olds that their father might have another child? How do you discuss adult mistakes and consequences with children who still believe their parents are infallible?" "There's a little boy who might need our help," Sarah said finally. "Daddy and I are trying to figure out the best way to help him." "What kind of help?" Emma asked. "He's sick, and he needs an operation to get better. Are we going to pay for it?" Sophie asked with the straightforward logic of childhood. "Maybe. We're still deciding." Emma sat up in bed. "If we can help a sick little boy get better, shouldn't we just do it? Why do you need to think about it?" Sarah looked at her daughter, 10 years old and already possessing a moral clarity that adults often lost in the complexity of real life. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Helping sick kids shouldn't be complicated," Emma replied. As Sarah turned off the lights and left the room, she carried Emma's words with her. Maybe her daughter was right. Maybe the moral choice was simpler than the emotional complications made it seem. While Sarah wrestled with her emotions, David did what he always did when faced with a problem. He researched. He spent hours online, learning about Miguel's heart condition, a ventricular septal defect, commonly called a hole in the heart. The surgery Miguel needed was called VSD closure, and it was indeed expensive but highly successful when performed by experienced pediatric cardiac surgeons. He researched Elena as well, though he felt guilty about it. Her social media presence was minimal but consistent with her story. Photos of Miguel at various ages, posts about her work as a hotel manager, images from community volunteer activities. Everything he found supported the narrative Elena had presented. She appeared to be exactly what she claimed, a single mother working hard to provide for her son, involved in her community, devoted to her child. Most importantly, David researched paternity testing. He learned that accurate results could be obtained quickly and discreetly. Part of him hoped the test would prove Miguel wasn't his son, that this entire situation was a case of mistaken identity. But as he looked at the photos Elena had left behind, images of Miguel at various ages, David saw his own childhood reflected back at him. The resemblance was too strong to deny. As the sun set over the Pacific, David Morrison sat alone in his mansion, surrounded by the trappings of success, and realized that everything he thought he knew about his life was about to change. The question was whether that change would destroy his family or give them a chance to become something better than they'd ever been before. 3 days after Elena's visit, David received the call that would eliminate all uncertainty. The DNA test results were conclusive. Miguel Martinez was his biological son. David sat in his car outside the medical laboratory, staring at the report that confirmed what everyone already knew. The scientific evidence was overwhelming, a 99.9% probability of paternity. He called Elena immediately. "I got the results," he said when she answered. "And?" Her voice was carefully neutral. "He's my son." The silence stretched between them for several seconds. "What happens now?" Elena asked finally. "I don't know," David admitted. "But we need to talk. All of us. Can you meet me somewhere this afternoon?" They arranged to meet at a small cafe in downtown Los Angeles, neutral territory between their two worlds. David arrived first, choosing a quiet corner table where they could speak privately. Elena appeared 15 minutes later, looking tired but determined. She had left Miguel with a neighbor, she explained, not wanting him to overhear adult conversations about his future. "Before we talk about anything else," David said, "I want you to know that regardless of what happens between Sarah and me, I will make sure Miguel gets the surgery he needs." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me. He's my son." The words felt strange in David's mouth. He had 2 daughters he adored, but the concept of having a son, especially one he'd never known existed, was still difficult to process. "Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She nodded. "Why did you really wait 7 years to contact me? I understand about pride and independence, but your son was sick. You could have reached out earlier." Elena stirred her coffee, gathering her thoughts. "Because I was afraid," she said finally. "Afraid that you would reject us. Afraid that you would think I was lying or trying to trap you. Afraid that your wife would hate me and make Miguel feel unwanted." She looked directly at him. "But mostly, I was afraid that if you did accept Miguel, you would want to take him away from me. You have money, power, resources I could never match. What if you decided a poor single mother wasn't good enough to raise your son?" David hadn't considered this perspective. In his world of corporate negotiations and business deals, he was accustomed to holding most of the power. It hadn't occurred to him that Elena might see him as a threat rather than a solution. "I would never try to take him away from you," David said. "You're his mother. You've raised him for 6 years. That bond is sacred. But you want to be part of his life now? I want to do what's best for Miguel. If that means being part of his life, then yes. If it means staying away but ensuring he has everything he needs, then I'll do that too." Elena studied his face, searching for sincerity. "He's a good boy," she said softly. "He's curious and funny and kind. He loves soccer and drawing pictures. He's afraid of thunderstorms but fascinated by airplanes. He asks questions about everything." David found himself smiling. "He sounds wonderful." "He is. And he deserves to know his father if his father wants to know him." While David met with Elena, Sarah was having her own revelation. She had spent 3 days thinking, crying, talking with Michelle, and trying to sort through her emotions. The anger was still there, sharp and painful whenever she thought about David's betrayal during one of the most difficult periods of their marriage. But alongside the anger was something else, a growing understanding of how broken their relationship had become, and how long they had both been pretending otherwise. Sarah realized that she had been as guilty as David of emotional withdrawal. Her grief over their pregnancy losses had created a wall between them that neither had known how to breach. David's affair was wrong, but her own refusal to let him help her heal had contributed to his sense of isolation. More importantly, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Miguel. A 6-year-old boy who looked like her husband, who needed expensive surgery to save his life, who had done nothing wrong but exist. "I think I need to meet him," Sarah told Michelle over lunch. "The boy." "Yes. I need to see him, talk to him, understand who he is." Michelle raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I don't think I'll ever be ready. But I think it's necessary." That afternoon, Sarah called David. "I want to meet Miguel," she said without preamble. "Sarah, are you sure?" "No, I'm not sure about anything. But I need to see him. I need to understand what we're dealing with." The DNA results came back. He's my son. Sarah closed her eyes. Hearing it confirmed felt like a physical blow, but not an unexpected one. I know, she said. I could see it the moment I looked at him. They arranged to meet the next day at a park in Santa Monica, public enough to feel safe, private enough to allow for honest conversation. Palisades Park overlooked the Pacific Ocean, its grassy areas dotted with palm trees and playground equipment. Sarah arrived early, sitting on a bench where she could watch for David, Elena, and Miguel. She saw them coming from several blocks away, David's tall frame unmistakable even at a distance, Elena walking beside him, and a small boy running ahead to explore the playground equipment. As they got closer, Sarah's breath caught. In daylight, in motion, Miguel's resemblance to David was even more striking. He moved like David had as a child, with the same confident stride, the same curious head tilts when something caught his attention. Sarah, David said as they approached. Thank you for doing this. Elena looked nervous but determined. Mrs. Morrison, I appreciate you agreeing to meet with us. Sarah's attention, however, was focused on Miguel. He had approached her bench with the fearless curiosity of childhood, studying her with those familiar green eyes. Are you David's wife? He asked in accented but clear English. Yes, I am, Sarah replied. He said you have 2 little girls. I do. They're 10 years old. They're twins. Miguel's eyes widened. Twins. That means they look exactly the same. Sarah found herself smiling despite her emotional turmoil. They look very similar, but they have different personalities. I wish I had a brother or sister, Miguel said with the wistful honesty of an only child. The innocent comment hit Sarah like a physical blow. This child, David's son, wished for siblings. Sarah's daughters were his half-sisters. Elena quickly intervened. Miguel, why don't you go play on the swings? We'll watch you from here. As Miguel ran toward the playground, Sarah watched him with a mixture of fascination and heartbreak. He was so clearly David's child, but he was also completely his own person, energetic, curious, and innocent of the adult complications surrounding his existence. He's beautiful, Sarah said quietly. Elena's expression softened. Thank you. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching Miguel play. He had found another child to play with and was animatedly explaining something about the slide, his hands moving expressively as he spoke. What's he like? Sarah asked. Elena smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from her. He's everything to me. He's smart, maybe too smart sometimes. He asks questions I don't know how to answer. He's gentle with animals and smaller children. He tries to take care of me when I work late or when I'm worried about money. He knows about the surgery. He knows his heart is different and that doctors need to fix it. He doesn't understand how serious it is, and I want to keep it that way for as long as possible. Sarah watched Miguel attempt to go down the slide backward, laughing when he tumbled off at the bottom. He looks exactly like David did at that age, she said. I know. Sometimes it's difficult. Seeing David's expressions on his face, hearing David's laugh come out of his mouth. Sarah looked at Elena with new understanding. It must have been lonely, raising him alone and seeing constant reminders of someone who wasn't there. Elena nodded. There were times I wanted to call David, not for money or support, but just so Miguel could know his father. But I was too proud, and too afraid. What changed? Miguel's condition got worse. But also, he started asking harder questions. Why don't I have a daddy? Did my daddy not want me? Am I not good enough to have a father like other kids? Elena's voice broke slightly. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that his father doesn't know he exists? How do you make a child understand that it's not about his worth, but about adult mistakes and pride? Sarah felt tears starting in her eyes. Despite everything, the betrayal, the shock, the upheaval of her life, she couldn't help but empathize with Elena's situation. You did what you thought was right, Sarah said. Did I? Sometimes I think I was selfish. I wanted to prove I could raise him alone, provide for him alone. But maybe what Miguel needed was more important than what I needed to prove. David had been listening to this exchange in silence, but now he spoke up. You've done an incredible job, Elena. Look at him. He's happy, confident, secure in your love. You gave him what he needed most. But not everything he needed, Elena replied. Not a father. Not siblings. Not the resources that could have prevented this medical crisis. As if summoned by their conversation, Miguel ran back toward the bench, slightly out of breath from playing. Mom, can we go get ice cream? He asked Elena. We'll see, Mijo. Miguel turned to Sarah. Do you want to come get ice cream with us? The simple invitation, offered with complete innocence and trust, nearly broke Sarah's composure. This child, this living reminder of her husband's infidelity, was inviting her to share ice cream as if she were simply another adult in his world. That's very kind of you to ask, Sarah managed to say. You seem sad, Miguel observed with the blunt honesty of childhood. Ice cream makes sad people feel better. Sarah looked at this 6-year-old boy who was trying to comfort her, and something shifted in her heart. The anger and betrayal were still there, but they were joined by something else, protective instinct. This child was innocent. Whatever had happened between the adults, Miguel deserved love, security, and the chance to grow up healthy and whole. You know what? Sarah said, surprising herself. I think ice cream sounds like a wonderful idea. Dr. Patricia Hernandez was one of the top pediatric cardiac surgeons on the West Coast. Her office at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center displayed diplomas from Harvard Medical School and certificates from prestigious medical institutions around the world. David, Sarah, and Elena sat across from Dr. Hernandez's desk while Miguel played quietly in the corner with toys provided by the medical office. The doctor had spent the previous hour examining Miguel and reviewing his medical records. Miguel's condition is serious but absolutely treatable, Dr. Hernandez explained, pointing to the echocardiogram images on her computer screen. He has what we call a ventricular septal defect, essentially, a hole between the two lower chambers of his heart. She traced the defect with her pen. This particular hole is large enough that it's causing his heart to work much harder than it should. Over time, this extra work can damage the heart muscle and lungs. How much time does he have? Elena asked, her voice tight with controlled fear. He's not in immediate danger, but I wouldn't recommend waiting longer than 6 months for the surgery. The longer we wait, the harder it will be for his heart to recover fully. David leaned forward. What does the surgery involve? It's called VSD closure. We'll make a small incision in his chest, use a heart-lung machine to temporarily take over his circulation, and then close the hole using a patch. The procedure typically takes 3 to 4 hours. And the recovery? Sarah asked. Most children are back to normal activities within 6 weeks. Miguel is young and otherwise healthy, so I expect him to do very well. Dr. Hernandez's expression grew more serious. I should mention that while this is a routine procedure for us, it is still open-heart surgery. There are always risks involved. Elena's face went pale. What kind of risks? The mortality rate for this surgery is less than 1% when performed at a center like ours. The most common complications are minor, temporary irregular heartbeat, minor bleeding. Serious complications are very rare. Miguel looked up from his toys. Are you talking about my heart operation? The adults exchanged glances. They had tried to keep the conversation technical, but Miguel was clearly listening. Dr. Hernandez smiled at him. We are, Miguel. Do you have any questions about it? Will it hurt? You'll be asleep during the operation, so you won't feel anything. Afterward, you might be a little sore, but we have very good medicine to help with that. Will I be able to play soccer after? Once you're all healed up, you'll be able to play soccer better than ever. Your heart will be stronger. Miguel nodded seriously, then returned to his toys as if open-heart surgery was just another item on his 6-year-old agenda. After the medical consultation, the three adults met with the hospital's financial counselor. The numbers were staggering but not unexpected. Total cost of surgery, including pre-operative testing, the procedure itself, hospital stay, and follow-up care, $187,000. Elena's insurance would cover approximately $45,000, leaving a balance of $142,000. We do offer payment plans, the counselor explained, but given the amount involved, we typically require a significant down payment before scheduling surgery. Elena stared at the paperwork, her face a mask of controlled desperation. Even with a payment plan, the monthly costs would be more than her entire salary. David spoke up. What if I guarantee payment? What would you need from me to schedule the surgery immediately? The counselor's expression brightened considerably. After reviewing David's financial information, she confirmed that the surgery could be scheduled within 2 weeks. As they left the hospital, Elena was quiet. Finally, she stopped walking and turned to face David and Sarah. I can't let you pay for this without understanding what it means, she said. Once you pay for Miguel's surgery, you'll be part of his life forever. There's no going back to pretending he doesn't exist. David looked at Sarah, who had been silent throughout most of the hospital visit. We understand, Sarah said quietly. Do you? Elena pressed. Because Miguel is going to want to know his father after this. He's going to want to know his half-sisters. He's going to want to be part of your family in some way. Elena, David said, he's my son. Biology doesn't care about convenience or complications. He exists, and he's part of my family whether I acknowledge it or not. But what does that mean practically? Elena asked. Visitation? Holidays? What happens when your daughters ask why their half-brother doesn't live with them? Sarah had been dreading these exact questions, but hearing them spoken aloud forced her to confront the reality of their situation. I don't know, Sarah admitted. But I know that boy deserves to live, and he deserves to know his father. We'll figure out the rest as we go. That evening, Sarah and David sat in their living room for the first time since Elena's initial visit. The twins were at Michelle's house for one more night, giving their parents space to talk. I want to pay for the surgery, David said. Whatever it costs, whatever it means for us, I can't let my son die because of money. I know, Sarah replied. And I agree. David looked surprised. You do. David, I've been angry and hurt and confused for the past week. But I've also been thinking about what kind of people we want to be. Sarah turned to face her husband fully. That little boy didn't choose to be born. He didn't choose to have a heart defect. He didn't choose to have a father who didn't know he existed. But he's here, and he's innocent, and he needs help. What are you saying? I'm saying that regardless of what happens between us, we're going to help Miguel. We're going to pay for his surgery, and we're going to make sure he knows he has a father who cares about him. David felt tears starting in his eyes. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for Mexico City, I'm sorry for not telling you, I'm sorry for all of it. I know you are. And I'm sorry too. What are you sorry for? For shutting you out when I was grieving. For making you feel like you couldn't comfort me. For creating the loneliness that led you to someone else. Sarah's voice was steady but sad. I'm not excusing what you did, David. But I'm acknowledging my part in what our marriage became. They sat in silence for several minutes, processing the weight of their admissions. What happens now? David asked. Now we schedule Miguel's surgery. We figure out how to tell Emma and Sophie that they have a half-brother. We go to marriage counseling and try to rebuild trust between us. Sarah paused. And we create a new normal that includes Miguel in our lives somehow. You really mean that? I watched that little boy try to comfort me at the park because he thought I was sad. He offered to share his ice cream with a complete stranger. He's been raised by a woman who taught him kindness and empathy despite facing incredible challenges alone. Sarah's voice grew stronger. Miguel is part of our family now, whether we planned it or not. Emma and Sophie are going to have a half-brother who needs surgery. We're going to help him, and we're going to love him, because that's what families do." David reached for Sarah's hand, and for the first time in years, she didn't pull away. "Can we really do this?" he asked. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I know we're going to try." Outside their window, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, its waves constant and patient, wearing away the hardest rocks one tide at a time. Change, Sarah realized, didn't always come as a devastating storm. Sometimes it came as a steady, persistent force that gradually reshaped everything you thought you knew about yourself and your life. The morning of Miguel's surgery dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect Southern California days that made the rest of the world seem possible. David and Sarah arrived at Elena's apartment at 5:30 a.m. to drive together to the hospital. Elena answered the door already dressed, her hair pulled back severely, her face showing the strain of a sleepless night. Miguel was still asleep on the couch, having been too excited and nervous to sleep in his own bed. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked Elena. "I keep thinking about everything that could go wrong," Elena admitted. "I know the doctor said the risks are minimal, but he's my whole world. If something happens to him..." "Nothing is going to happen," David said firmly. "Dr. Hernandez is one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the country. Miguel is young and strong. He's going to be fine." They woke Miguel gently. He was groggy but excited, chattering about how his heart was going to be fixed and how he'd be able to run faster afterward. His innocence in the face of major surgery was both heartbreaking and inspiring. During the drive to Cedars-Sinai, Miguel asked David questions about everything he saw: the tall buildings, the other cars, the early morning joggers along the street. "David," Miguel said as they neared the hospital, "after my heart is fixed, will you teach me to throw a baseball?" David's throat tightened. "I'd love to teach you to throw a baseball." "And will your daughters want to meet me?" Sarah turned around from the front seat. "They're very excited to meet you, Miguel. They've been asking about you every day." This was true. Emma and Sophie had peppered Sarah with questions about their half-brother, displaying the adaptability of childhood that often surpassed adult flexibility. The pediatric cardiac surgery waiting room at Cedars-Sinai was designed to be calming: soft colors, comfortable seating, large windows overlooking a garden. But no amount of thoughtful design could ease the anxiety of parents waiting while their children underwent major surgery. Elena sat rigidly in her chair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. David paced near the windows. Sarah alternated between reading magazines she wasn't processing and checking her phone for updates from Michelle about the twins. "The nurse said it would be 3 to 4 hours, Elena said for the 5th time. "Dr. Hernandez said Miguel's case was straightforward," David replied, also for the 5th time. They had been having the same reassuring conversations for 2 hours, each of them trying to maintain hope for the others while privately battling their own fears. At 11:30 a.m., Dr. Hernandez appeared in the waiting room, still wearing her surgical scrubs. The expression on her face told them everything they needed to know before she spoke. "The surgery went perfectly," she announced. "Miguel did beautifully. We were able to close the defect completely, and his heart is already functioning much more efficiently." Elena burst into tears of relief. David felt his knees go weak. Sarah found herself hugging Elena without thinking about it, both women crying and laughing simultaneously. "When can we see him?" Elena asked. "He's in recovery now. It'll be another hour before he's awake enough for visitors, but you can see him briefly then." Dr. Hernandez smiled. "I expect Miguel to make a full recovery. In 6 weeks, you'll have a hard time keeping up with him." Miguel looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and machines. But his color was already better than it had been in months, and his breathing was steady and unlabored. Elena sat beside the bed, holding his hand and whispering to him in Spanish. David stood at the foot of the bed, marveling at this child who was biologically his but felt like a stranger, yet somehow familiar at the same time. Sarah watched the scene from the doorway, processing her own complex emotions. This was her husband's son with another woman, but she felt genuinely invested in his recovery. Somehow, over the past 2 weeks, Miguel had become important to her in his own right. When Miguel's eyes fluttered open an hour later, the first thing he said was, "Did they fix my heart?" "Yes, Mijo," Elena said, kissing his forehead. "Your heart is all better now." Miguel looked around the room and saw David and Sarah. "You stayed," he said, sounding surprised. "Of course we stayed," David replied. "We wanted to make sure you were okay." "When I get better, can I meet Emma and Sophie?" Sarah stepped forward. "Actually, they're here. They're in the waiting room with my sister. Would you like to meet them?" Miguel nodded eagerly, despite his obvious exhaustion. 10 minutes later, Emma and Sophie entered the recovery room, clearly awed by the hospital setting but curious about their half-brother. "Hi, Miguel," Emma said shyly. "I'm Emma. And I'm Sophie. We brought you a present." They had made him a card covered in stickers and drawings of hearts. "Get well soon," was written in 10-year-old handwriting across the front. Miguel studied the card carefully. "This is beautiful. Thank you. Mom told us you like to draw," Sophie said. "When you feel better, maybe we can draw together." "I'd like that," Miguel replied. Sarah watched her daughters interact with their half-brother and felt something settle in her chest. This was going to work. It would be complicated and unconventional, but it was going to work. As the sun began to set outside the hospital windows, the Morrison family, all of them, sat together in Miguel's recovery room. It wasn't the family any of them had planned, but it was the family they had become. Miguel's recovery exceeded even Dr. Hernandez's optimistic predictions. Within 4 weeks, he was running around Elena's apartment with more energy than she'd seen from him in over a year. Within 6 weeks, he was playing soccer with neighborhood kids, keeping up easily with children who had never had to worry about their hearts. The surgery had been more than physically transformative. Knowing that he had a father who cared about him, half-sisters who were excited to know him, and an extended family that had chosen to include him had given Miguel a confidence and security that glowed from within. David and Sarah's marriage had entered counseling, working through not just the affair and its aftermath, but years of accumulated disconnection and miscommunication. The process was difficult, sometimes painful, but it was also healing in ways neither of them had expected. "Having Miguel in our lives has actually made us better parents to Emma and Sophie," Sarah reflected during one of their sessions. "We talk more openly now. We don't assume we know what each other is thinking." The twins had embraced their half-brother with the uncomplicated acceptance of childhood. Miguel spent alternating weekends at the Morrison house, sharing adventures with Emma and Sophie that ranged from beach excursions to movie marathons. Elena had been the most cautious about the new arrangement, protective of both Miguel's emotions and her own independence. But she had gradually come to trust that David and Sarah's commitment to Miguel was genuine, not motivated by guilt or obligation. "I never imagined it would work like this," she told Sarah during one of Miguel's weekend visits. "I thought having Miguel know his father would somehow diminish what he and I have together. Instead, it's made our bond even stronger." Elena had also started dating again, something she hadn't done since Miguel was born. Having support from David and Sarah had given her the emotional space to consider her own happiness, not just her son's needs. On a warm Saturday morning in spring, the extended Morrison family gathered at Palisades Park for a family portrait, the same park where Sarah had first really met Miguel 6 months earlier. The photographer positioned them carefully, David and Sarah in the center, Emma and Sophie on Sarah's side, Miguel and Elena on David's side. But the formal arrangement quickly devolved into natural groupings as the children moved around, Miguel showing his half-sisters a soccer ball trick, Elena and Sarah discussing plans for Miguel's upcoming 7th birthday party. "This is nice," David said to Sarah as they watched their complicated, unconventional family interact. "It is," Sarah agreed. "It's not what I would have chosen, but it's good." The photographer called for their attention, and they arranged themselves once more. This time, instead of the formal positioning, they stood as they naturally clustered, Miguel between Emma and Sophie, Elena next to Sarah, David with his arm around his wife and his hand on his son's shoulder. Everyone say, family, the photographer called out. Family, they chorused, and the camera captured a moment of genuine happiness. As they prepared to leave the park, Miguel ran up to David. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. Are you proud to be my dad? David knelt down to Miguel's eye level, his heart full of an emotion he was still learning to name. Miguel, I am proud to be your father every single day. I'm proud of how brave you were during your surgery. I'm proud of how kind you are to your sisters. I'm proud of how much you love your mom. And I'm proud that you're part of our family. Miguel hugged him tightly. I'm proud to be your son too. As they walked back toward their cars, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The knock on their door 7 months ago had felt like the end of everything. Instead, it had been the beginning of something none of them could have imagined. Sometimes, Sarah realized, the most devastating interruptions to our planned lives turn out to be exactly what we needed, even when we're too afraid or too proud to ask for it. The Morrison family, all of them, had learned that love isn't diminished when it's shared more widely. Instead, it multiplies, creating connections and possibilities that none of them could have discovered alone. As they drove home through the streets of Los Angeles, Miguel fell asleep in his car seat, exhausted from a morning of playing with his sisters. Elena watched him in the rearview mirror, marveling at the peace on his face. 7 months ago, she had knocked on a stranger's door with her sick son, desperate and terrified. Now, she was driving away from a family gathering, secure in the knowledge that Miguel was loved and protected by more people than just herself. Sometimes, Elena thought, the scariest decisions turn out to be the most necessary ones. The 3 cars, David and Sarah with the twins, Elena with Miguel, and Michelle following behind, made their way through the sunny California afternoon, carrying a family that had been broken apart and rebuilt into something stronger, more complex, and more beautiful than any of them had dared to hope. In the end, David Morrison had discovered that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, making difficult choices, and choosing each other again and again, even when, especially when, the path forward isn't clear. The millionaire's marriage that had been about to crash had been saved not by avoiding the crisis, but by walking straight through it, together. What would you have done in Sarah's position? How do you think families should handle unexpected challenges that test everything they thought they knew about themselves? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell. Next week, we'll share the incredible story of a billionaire tech mogul who discovered his night security guard was actually the son he'd given up for adoption 30 years earlier. A story that will change how you think about second chances and the power of forgiveness. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes our greatest challenges carry our most precious gifts.